My name's Nicole, and I'm calling because I'm concerned about a friend of mine.
Her car's in the garage, her shoes she wears every single day.
Hey, Chris, Officer Coonrod, Frederick Police Department. So, do you have any idea where your wife is? Does she work?
Yeah, she works from home.
Oh, from
work. I'll be on the side. I just want to get everything back in.
He started offering reasons as to what he was putting in the vehicle, and he was kind of hyper about that.
No.
He doesn't look worried. He looks like he's trying to cover his tracks.
Do you know where Shanann is now?
No. And well, no, not her.
Chris Watts stuck his girls in these oil drums.
I don't know what to do.
I know.
I didn't know what to do.
Colorado looked peaceful that morning. Bright sunlight over quiet suburban streets, sprinklers running across front lawns, neighbors leaving for work, kids still half asleep before the school week started again. Nothing about that August morning looked unusual from the outside. But inside one house in Frederick, Colorado, something horrifying had already happened. A pregnant woman was gone, 2 little girls were gone, and the man standing in the middle of it all was already trying to act like none of it had anything to do with him.
Who first noticed Shanann was missing?
That's what makes the Chris Watts case so disturbing years later. Not just the crime itself, the performance afterward, because for hours Chris tried to convince everyone he was simply a worried husband whose family had mysteriously vanished overnight. But the cameras were rolling. Police body cams, neighbor security cameras, cell phones, and when you watch everything unfold in order, it becomes terrifyingly clear that the story started falling apart almost immediately. Not because detectives uncovered some genius piece of evidence right away, because Chris himself could barely hold the act together. The first signs of trouble didn't come from him. They came from Shanann's friend. She knew something wasn't right almost instantly. Shanann wasn't answering calls, wasn't answering texts. She had a doctor's appointment that morning and suddenly went completely silent. That alone was strange. According to friends and family, Shanann documented everything, stayed connected constantly, especially during her pregnancy. And she would never disappear without telling somebody where she was going. Especially not with her daughters. So her friend drove to the house. And the second she got there, the alarm bells got louder. Shanann's vehicle was still in the garage. Her shoes were inside. Her purse was there. Medication still sitting in the home. The girls' belongings untouched. Nothing looked packed. Nothing looked planned. It looked frozen. Like life had suddenly stopped in the middle of an ordinary morning. Police were called quickly.
I'm concerned about a friend of mine. She won't answer phone calls. She won't answer text messages.
And at first, the responding officer approached it exactly the way most people would. Maybe she fainted upstairs. Maybe she was sick. Maybe she locked herself in a room accidentally. Maybe the girls were asleep somewhere inside. So the officer started knocking hard on doors and windows, walking around the property trying to get any response at all. But there was one huge problem. Nobody could get inside, and strangely the husband wasn't there either. Chris Watts was at work. That detail alone immediately stood out to some people later. Because if your pregnant wife and 2 daughters suddenly disappear, most people drop absolutely everything. But according to the officer and the people at the house, Chris kept saying he was almost there. 5 minutes away, then still 5 minutes away, then still not there. And what should have been a quick drive stretched longer and longer, nearly an hour. That delay would become one of the first major red flags, because it felt less like panic and more like stalling. Eventually, Chris finally arrived, and almost immediately the energy around him felt wrong.
Why did Chris Watts seem suspicious to police?
Not dramatic, not explosive, just wrong. Instead of rushing toward the house, he moved slowly, calmly, almost casually. The officer is standing there thinking a pregnant woman could be unconscious inside, maybe having a medical emergency, and Chris is walking around like he's late to a meeting. No sprinting, no frantic yelling for Shanann, no immediate desperation. Instead, he started doing little things that made no sense in the moment, checking random objects, walking around the driveway, opening the passenger side of his truck, messing around near Shanann's vehicle before seriously searching the house. People later obsessed over those moments. Was he hiding something, removing something, checking whether he forgot something? Nobody knows exactly what he was doing there. But what's undeniable is this: he did not behave like a terrified husband. He behaved like somebody trying to stay in control of a situation.
This time she takes for migraine. She took more Amitrax this last month than she ever had before, but that's just...
And once they finally got inside the house, things became even stranger. The friend who had called police looked genuinely terrified. You could hear it in her voice immediately. Her breathing was shaky. Her movements were frantic. She kept trying Shanann's phone over and over again. Every second without an answer made the fear feel heavier. Meanwhile, Chris mostly wandered through the house with almost no urgency at all. That contrast became impossible to ignore. One person acting emotionally overwhelmed because a loved one might be in danger. The other acting emotionally disconnected from the entire situation. The officer started asking basic questions. Where could she have gone? Did they fight recently? Would she leave voluntarily?
You guys have any kind of issues, marital issues, or?
We're going through separation.
Was there tension in the marriage? And Chris answered almost everything with vague, lifeless responses. I don't know. No idea. Maybe. Nothing sounded natural. It sounded like somebody buying time while trying to invent a believable version of reality. And something else stood out immediately. Chris never seemed focused on finding them. That's important, because innocent people usually throw ideas everywhere during a crisis.
Someone pull often, or
It just depends. I mean, on a hot day like this, I would say...
Maybe she went here. Maybe check this place. What about her friend? Call hospitals, check cameras. Desperate people search constantly for possibilities. Chris mostly stayed passive, detached, like he was waiting for the situation to move around him instead of fighting to solve it. At one point, the officer even floated a completely reasonable possibility. Maybe Shanann had taken the girls somewhere nearby. Maybe the community pool. Maybe a friend's house. And Chris reacted almost like the suggestion annoyed him. No excitement. No let's go check right now. Nothing.
does she work?
Yeah, she works from home.
Oh, from home?
She works this...
That lack of urgency kept building in everyone's mind, especially Shanann's friend. There's a moment during the body cam footage where she looks directly at Chris after hearing one of his explanations, and it's like something changes in her face instantly. Not confusion, recognition. Like deep down, she suddenly understood what nobody wanted to say out loud yet, because humans are incredibly sensitive to emotional authenticity. And Chris didn't feel authentic, not even close. Then came one of the most disturbing moments inside the house. The wedding ring. Chris suddenly walked into the bedroom and came back holding Shanann's ring on the tip of his finger, almost presenting it to the room, like it was evidence supporting some future explanation. She left. She walked out. She doesn't want the marriage anymore. That's how it felt. But instead of looking heartbroken, Chris looked detached from it completely. Even the way he held the ring felt strange, cold, like he wanted distance from what it represented. And that moment changed the atmosphere even more, because the ring didn't feel discovered naturally. It felt introduced, almost staged. The officer noticed. The friend noticed. Everyone in that house could feel something wasn't adding up. And then the conversation shifted towards something that would completely change the day. The neighbor's security camera.
What did the neighbor's security camera show?
Next door lived a man named Nate. At first, nobody thought much about his surveillance system. But once he mentioned having footage from earlier that morning, Chris's entire demeanor shifted. Suddenly the nervousness became visible, more pacing, more phone checking, more awkward smiles, more tension in the face. This was the first time all day he looked genuinely afraid. Not afraid for Shanann, not afraid for the girls, afraid for himself. Because for the first time since police arrived, there was something he couldn't fully control anymore. Video evidence, a timeline, reality recorded on camera. And in only a few minutes, Chris Watts would stand inside his neighbor's living room watching footage from the exact morning his family disappeared, a moment that many people now believe was the true beginning of the end. Inside Nate's living room, the atmosphere became suffocating. Everyone around the television quietly while the surveillance footage loaded up. The officer stood calmly nearby. Nate watched carefully. And Chris Watts looked like a man trying not to collapse under invisible pressure. That's what makes this footage so unsettling years later. You can literally watch somebody realizing their carefully built lie is starting to crack open.
Loaded my stuff up in my coolers.
The footage from earlier that morning finally appeared on screen. Chris's truck backed into the driveway before sunrise. That immediately stood out. Neighbors later said he normally parked differently, but this time he had reversed the truck unusually close to the garage, close enough to partially block what was happening. And as the footage rolled, Chris started physically reacting to it, not emotionally, physically.
How did Chris behave during the investigation?
He swayed back and forth constantly, took deep breaths, put his hands on top of his head, avoided looking directly at the television, buried himself in his phone. Those details became famous later because they looked so unnatural.
Yeah, we can pick up cars coming this way. I get anything coming this way and making this turn.
Most innocent people in that moment would be laser focused on the footage, searching desperately for clues, trying to spot movement, trying to understand where their loved ones went. Chris mostly seemed interested in escaping the moment mentally. At several points, he stared down at his phone almost continuously. People later speculated he was texting the woman he had secretly been involved with. Whether that's true or not, the optics were horrifying. Police are searching for your pregnant wife and missing children, and you can barely stop checking your phone. The officer noticed everything. That's another important detail people misunderstand about investigations. Good investigators often stay calm when they suspect somebody. They don't immediately scream accusations, they observe. They let silence work, and silence was crushing Chris, because every second that footage played made him visibly more uncomfortable. At one point, he completely turned away from the screen and stared toward the front door. That body language matters. People naturally orient themselves toward exits when stress spikes and the brain shifts into fight or flight mode. Chris looked trapped, like every second inside that room was becoming harder to survive. Then came the sweating. His forehead became visibly shiny under the light. His sunglasses even slipped off his head at one point because of the sweat building up on his skin. That's how intense the pressure had become. And remember, this wasn't happening during some aggressive interrogation. This was just him standing in a neighbor's house watching security footage. But that footage represented reality. And reality was dangerous to him.
In the toolbox, I knew I was going to have to do some pumping into rubbers today. That's why I was out so far.
As the video continued, another thing became obvious. Chris constantly over-explained random details. Liars often do this because silence feels threatening. So they fill space with unnecessary information, garage sensors, parking habits, tiny household issues, random stories that had nothing to do with locating Shanann or the girls.
What else can I do with this?
It was diversion after diversion after diversion, and the more he talked, the stranger it sounded. The officer kept testing simple possibilities. Maybe Shanann went to a friend's place. Maybe she took the kids somewhere nearby. Maybe someone picked them up, normal ideas. But Chris reacted oddly to nearly every suggestion. Not with hope, not with urgency, more like resistance. Like each possibility created inconvenience instead of relief.
He started offering reasons as to what he was putting in the vehicle, and he was kind of hyper about that.
That detail haunted viewers later, because he never behaved like a father desperate to find his daughters alive. There was no emotional momentum toward rescue, no frantic energy, no instinctive drive to search. Instead, he looked like a man trying to survive suspicion, and Nate noticed it too. After Chris stepped outside briefly with police, Nate quietly told the officer something important.
No.
This wasn't normal behavior for Chris. The calm, easygoing version of him everyone knew had disappeared. The man standing there that morning was nervous, restless, agitated. That statement mattered because baseline behavior is huge in investigations. People react differently to stress, yes, but drastic deviation from normal personality can become extremely revealing. And by now, police were stacking red flags rapidly. The delayed arrival home, the emotional flatness, the strange smiles, the wedding ring, the lack of urgency, the awkward reactions to the footage.
He doesn't look worried. He looks like he's trying to cover his tracks.
The nervous pacing, the defensive explanations, separately maybe innocent, together deeply troubling. And Chris kept making things worse. At one point, while the footage played, he folded his arms tightly against himself and rocked side to side-eyed. That kind of posture is often associated with self-comfort behavior during high stress, almost like the body is physically trying to calm itself down.
He's over here telling you 3 times what he took out, what he did.
Another moment, he pressed his lips tightly together while staring away from the screen. Investigators often associate that with withholding information or internal tension, agon, not proof alone. But combined with everything else, it painted a horrifying picture. Then something almost surreal happened. A television program in the background briefly mentioned pregnancy and childbirth, and Chris suddenly jumped on the topic awkwardly, trying to sound concerned about Shanann's safety.
She's pregnant as well.
How far along?
14, 15 weeks.
But it felt artificial, like somebody imitating emotion instead of actually feeling it. That became one of the most disturbing aspects of the entire case. Chris often sounded like he learned emotional responses from movies rather than genuine human empathy. Even the officer seemed increasingly disturbed. You can see moments where he touches his face repeatedly while listening to Chris talk. Investigators later suggested he was already strongly leaning toward believing Chris was involved. But instead of confronting him aggressively, the officer stayed patient. Because police understand something important. The more comfortable guilty people feel, the more they usually reveal. And Chris revealed plenty. Not through direct confession yet. Through behavior, through tone, through absence of emotion. The cameras captured all of it. And while neighbors, officers, and friends were slowly realizing something terrible had probably happened, Chris Watts kept standing there in that living room, watching himself on video during the exact hours his family vanished. A man unknowingly observing the beginning of his own downfall in real time. As the investigation intensified, Chris Watts kept trying to maintain the image of a worried husband. But every appearance made things worse. News crews started arriving outside the neighborhood almost immediately. Microphones, cameras, satellite vans lining the streets. And instead of avoiding attention, Chris willingly stepped in front of it. That decision became catastrophic for him, because once the public saw him speak, millions of people instantly felt the same thing investigators were already feeling. Something about him was deeply off. His interviews sounded rehearsed, emotionally empty, like someone trying to imitate what grief should look like. He stood outside his house asking for his wife and daughters to come home.
I want her back so bad. I want those kids back so bad.
But there was almost no visible desperation behind the words. No tears, no rage, no collapse, just strange smiles, awkward phrasing, and detached language.
And there was no real plea for their safety, what happened to them.
At one point, he referred to his daughters almost mechanically, like he was reciting information instead of speaking about children he loved. That emotional disconnect became impossible for people to ignore. And meanwhile, investigators were quietly tightening the pressure behind the scenes. They analyzed timelines, phone records, security footage, conversations, and the more they looked, the less Chris's story held together. Small inconsistencies began piling up rapidly, different versions of event, contradictions about conversations, shifting explanations, tiny details changing under pressure. That's how many investigations work. Not one giant dramatic mistake. Death by 1,000 small lies. Eventually, investigators scheduled a polygraph examination.
What happened after Chris failed the polygraph test?
And this moment became one of the most famous turning points in the entire case.
It would be really stupid for you to come in and take a polygraph today.
Exactly.
Before the test even started, detectives already suspected Chris heavily. But the polygraph served another purpose. Psychological pressure, a controlled environment designed to squeeze the story harder and harder until cracks formed. Chris walked into that room still believing he might survive the situation. But the moment the examiner confronted him with the failed results, you can actually watch the confidence drain out of him.
Do you know where Shanann is now?
No.
His posture changed instantly. His voice weakened. His breathing shifted. The performance started collapsing. Then investigators used a classic interrogation strategy. Instead of immediately accusing him of everything, they offered him a softer version of events. Maybe Shanann hurt the children. Maybe he reacted emotionally afterward. Maybe things spiraled out of control. To outsiders, that strategy can sound shocking. But psychologically, it's extremely effective, because guilty people often confess easier when they're offered a version of events that reduces shame or moral responsibility. And Chris took the bait, first partially, then more fully.
I cheated on her. I know. And this is very good.
Eventually, he admitted killing Shanann, but even then, investigators believed he was still minimizing what happened. And as the truth slowly emerged, the horror of the case deepened beyond what many people imagined possible.
And well, no, not her.
His pregnant wife had been murdered. His daughters had been murdered. And afterward, he transported their bodies to the oil site where he worked. The brutality of that reality stunned even experienced investigators. But strangely, what haunted the public most wasn't only the violence, it was the normality surrounding it. The smiling Facebook videos, the family photographs, birthday parties, vacation pictures, ordinary suburban life. From the outside, the Watts family looked completely average. That's what terrified people. Because Chris Watts didn't resemble the stereotypical image of a monster. He looked quiet, mild, forgettable. Like somebody you'd pass at the grocery store without thinking twice. And that forced people to confront something deeply uncomfortable. Sometimes evil hides behind normal faces. That's why the body cam footage still fascinates millions of people years later. Not because it's dramatic in a Hollywood sense. Because it feels real, painfully real. You're watching human instincts slowly recognize danger before the facts are fully known. The friend sensed it. The neighbors sensed it. The officer sensed it. Even strangers online sensed it within hours. Not because they had secret evidence. Because emotionally, Chris never behaved like somebody terrified to lose his family. He behaved like somebody terrified of being exposed. And once you notice that distinction, every moment of the footage changes. The pacing feels different, the smiles feel disturbing. The phone checking looks suspicious. The lack of urgency becomes impossible to ignore. You stop watching a worried husband and start watching a man desperately trying to hold together a collapsing lie.
I don't know what to do.
I know.
I didn't know what to do.
That's what makes the surveillance footage in Nate's living room so haunting. Chris is literally standing there watching evidence move closer and closer to him while trying to pretend he's just another concerned observer. But his body keeps betraying him. The swaying, the sweating, the deep breaths, the avoidance. His nervous system was reacting to the truth even while his words tried to hide it. And maybe that's the most chilling part of the entire story. The cameras didn't just capture an investigation, they captured guilt under pressure, raw, unfiltered, minute by minute. Within days, Chris Watts confessed fully. Within months, he received multiple life sentences, and the image of the perfect suburban family shattered forever. But people still return to those body cam videos constantly. The driveway, the police officer calmly observing, the friend growing more suspicious by the minute, the neighbor watching silently, Chris swaying in front of the television while trying not to panic. Because there's something deeply unsettling about watching someone realize in real time that the version of reality they created is dying right in front of them. And no matter how hard they try to act normal, the truth keeps leaking out anyway.